about scary stories. This is All True Crime with Jodi ASMR. And tonight is a scary story night. It's one of my favorite nights that I enjoy so much with you all. Thank you for your subscribes. Thank you for being there, for commenting, for interacting with me. Just thank you for being there, watching my channel, and being a loyal listener. Thank you so much. I appreciate it more than anything. So tonight, we're going to read a couple scary stories. Some of my favorite. I See You. We fell in love with this historical house that was built in the late 1800s. Upon buying it and moving in, we adored its charm and appeal. After only 1 week in the house, we began to experience what we dubbed our unseen friend. For 5 years, we put up with numerous hauntings, trickery, and activity. Some minor, some terrifying. The first instance was during the summer in the middle of the night. The kids were out of school and able to be up late to a degree. And one night, our son Paxton came bolting breathless into our bedroom around midnight. He demanded why we were running across the floor downstairs back and forth. What? My husband looked at me, speechless, as I looked at him, confused. We had been in bed the entire time, reading, and we were just turning out our lights for the night. I told him it hadn't been us, but my husband, panicking, went to check on the noises while my son stayed in the room with me. He checked the entire house. It was still pitch black. All of the lights were still off and everything was locked up tight. He came back to the bedroom and shrugged, offering that maybe Paxton had a nightmare. My son was adamant this was not a nightmare, and that he hadn't even went to bed yet. I tried to calm him the best I could and walk him back to his bedroom. Fast forward to late August. The kids had just resumed school, and bedtimes were earlier now. It had been around 10 in the evening. My husband and I were reading the news on our phones. Suddenly, there was a loud thump, followed by 2 smaller thumps right outside our bedroom. Assuming it was one of our children out of bed, my husband went out of the room to catch them in the act. He was shocked to find the hallway pitch black and silent. Confused, he went down to their room to avoid getting into trouble for being past the bedtime. All 3 of them were sound asleep. A few months later, we were getting ready for Thanksgiving. We were preparing all of the smaller dishes the night before so the oven wasn't so crowded for the main dishes. I had just finished wrapping the last of the pre-made dishes and put it in the fridge. My husband was sitting on the sofa watching television. I took off my apron, hung it up, and went to join him on the couch. Suddenly, the back door swung open loudly and slammed shut. At first, we just accepted it. It was one of the kids coming in because it was starting to get dark outside. My husband yelled, "Don't drag mud in the house and don't slam the door." When there was no response, I went to check the mudroom and no one was there. When I peeked out the window beside the door and all 3 were still playing, I laughed in the backyard. I laughed at myself, at them laughing in the backyard. The night before Christmas, my husband and I finally finished putting all of the kids' presents out. We were exhausted. We had to build this and that, and it was easier for the kids in the morning. Instead of reading, we decided to go straight to bed. My husband fell asleep, before I could and started snoring loudly as usual. I was overcome with the feeling of being watched. I couldn't seem to shake it. I heard the sound of creaking floorboards right at the front of our bed. Completely frozen in place, freaking out, I tried my best to nudge my husband awake. He continued to snore, unfazed. I pulled the blankets over my head and listened in between my husband's snores. The creaking sounded as if it was moving to my side of the bed. I was too freaked out to lower the covers. I held my head and tried to nudge my husband again, but nothing. Still snoring. Snoring. At this point, I was absolutely terrified. My heart was literally ringing in my ears. Suddenly, it was as if a wind was on the other side of the blanket, or maybe beneath. A blanket ripped away from my fingers, slightly holding front of my face. I continued to hold my breath and squinted with my eyes closed. Then I heard the lowest whisper, "I see you." Over the years, there were many over looking down on him, I felt a slight breeze at the back of my hair and shivered from the cold air. I turned around and looked around to see, but noticed nothing amiss. I shrugged it off and went back to bed. Then, like I said, every night at 2:14 my breath would shake. The next night I thought it odd, but I still hadn't registered the fact that it happened exactly the same time as the night before. I thought maybe it was an aftershock from the day before. The third night the bed shook was the first time I recognized that the time of the event seemed the same as the night before. On a hunch, I jotted down the time in my journal next to my bed. The fourth night I was terrified when I looked over to the clock and saw the time was exactly the same. Some of the things that were happening, I had no idea why or how or what. It was unnerving. Then everything got worse. I had been watching television and the volume would go up and down on its own or change channels randomly. In the middle of watching something, I would be making some toast and the toaster would move on its own slowly across the counter. A few times in the middle of the night, I heard a sound like someone turning on the shower in the bathroom on the other side of the room. I thought it odd, so I got up to check on if my mom or dad were showering in the middle of the night. As soon as I opened the bathroom door, the shower turned off. No one was in the bathroom, but any further inspection, the shower walls were wet as if someone had in fact just taken a shower. To my relief, my father was transferred to Utah, and we were able to move out of that house and relocate. Nothing out of the ordinary has occurred in the new house. I'm still not sure what was up with the old house, or why nothing happened until exactly 1 year of living there. Story number 3. Paranormal follower for my birthday. Because I loved watching paranormal television shows, my boyfriend signed us up for a local paranormal investigation event at an abandoned and seemingly haunted asylum. Since I could remember, I had wanted to try a ghost box or voice recorder and ask questions in hopes of getting some kind of paranormal response. I guess part of me was hoping that I would feel some, hopeful of some personal sign that there was life after death. Let me give you some history. When I was 8 years old, I lost my father in a car crash. It was sudden and quick. They told us he probably didn't feel a thing. I think they told us that to make it hurt less, but nothing hurt as bad as knowing that one day your dad was going on your field trips with you, and the next all of those trips now distant memories. There would be no new ones. Since my dad passed away, I dealt with the loss the best that I knew how. When I hit about 14, I watched my first paranormal television show, and I was hooked. I had to know more. Then it just became a passion of mine, I guess. For my birthday, my boyfriend bought me a voice recorder. When I unwrapped the gift, I turned the voice recorder over in my hands and looked at him with questioning eyes. That's when he pointed to the envelope, which I greedily opened. Inside were 2 tickets to a haunted asylum, ghost hunt. I jumped out of my chair, threw my arms around his neck, and started squealing in glee. Not only was I going to see a haunted asylum, he had bought me a voice recorder. I was so excited. My boyfriend Eric and I had been living together. We started dating our freshman year of college, and 6 months later moved in together into a small 2-bedroom apartment fairly close was a relationship that I anticipated leading to marriage after graduation. The evening of the ghost hunt, we showed up 15 minutes early to the asylum. I climbed out of the car and zipped up my jacket. The wind had quite a chill to it. The grounds of the asylum were weed infested. Overgrown plants and weeds intermingled to where there was no telling them apart. A sign announcing the asylum teetered on one side and squeaked in the wind as it hung by only one side. The building looked quite massive in stature, but its exterior was crumbling with age and neglect. The windows were empty except for the bars on the inside. The steps leading to the front entrance were also in need of repair. Pieces of crumbled concrete lay on both sides of the set of the stairs. This building was in dire need of some TLC for sure. From behind me I heard another vehicle approaching. Eric and I turned and shielded our eyes from the headlights as they parked. A man in charge of the hunt, Charles, strode easily up the crumbling concrete stairs and stood just in front of the main entrance. He wavered there for a few minutes, watching everyone parked and headed towards the building. Once he thought everyone was within earshot, he welcomed everyone and went over the rules. We were to stay together in groups of 2, at least, and not destroy any property. No smoking was allowed in the building either. After an hour, we were to regroup right inside the front door and share any paranormal findings with the group. In front of us was a shallow set of stairs that led to the first ward. The frosted glass announcing the ward on the door was tinted gray from years of neglect. I scanned the room slowly as we made our way upstairs. I put my hands on the railing as I strode up the stairs and pulled it back in disgust. Everything, including the floors, railing, and desks, had at least an inch thick of dust on them. The walls appeared to be originally bright white and now were tinted a dirty but beige. The asylum also stuffy, probably from years of bedding up dust and grime. The air was thick as well, much thicker than the air from the outside. For the first 15 minutes, nothing much happened. We walked through the whole first ward, and to my dismay, we had spotted 0 ghosts. I finished, sighing as I fished in my pocket for my voice recorder and decided to give it a whirl. After I'd asked 3 or 4 questions, a door to our right slammed shut and then creaked back open ever so slowly. An echo from the door slamming seemed to thrive around the walls. It was as if it repeatedly bounced up and down the hallway. Refusing to cease, Eric and I looked at each other, nervously chuckled, and continued down the hall asking questions. Once we entered the 3rd floor ward, things began to happen more often. Each of these rooms did not have beds. They had gurneys. I couldn't figure out why, though. Was this a medical ward? We ducked into one of the first rooms. Eric was asking questions while I snooped around. I put my finger on the counter by a lone sink in the corner and swiped it. A thick dust bunny stuck to my finger. Ew, Eric shook his head. Don't do that, Kim. You don't know what's on that. I nodded, shook my finger excessively until the dust bunny fell off and wiped the remainder onto my jeans. From the hallway came thudding footsteps as if someone were running. We looked at each other, eyes huge, and headed to the doorway to peek out into the hall. As expected, no one was there. Must have been someone in another group or something, Eric said. I nodded in agreement, and we walked back out into the hallway towards the stairs leading to the 4th ward. From behind us we heard whispering. At first it was very slow, covered floor. All was undisturbed except for bare footprints. Wait a second, I knelt down and got a better look. Do you think these are from the running we just heard? I tilted my head up towards Eric and watched him gulp. Yeah, I think so. But why would one of the other group take their shoes off? I stood and put my hands on my hips. I don't think they were made by one of the other groups. I watched his eyes start nervously around. Maybe we should keep going. I was intrigued. I really wanted to linger in the hall and see what else we could conjure with our presence. But one look at Eric's sheet, white face told me he probably wasn't going to handle that very well. So I let him lead us up the fourth floor staircase. I gazed at my watch. It told me we had about 10 minutes before we needed to regroup at the front of the building. I held my arm up so Eric could see the time. He nodded in acknowledgement. The rest of our excursion was uneventful. I'm pretty sure Eric was thrilled that there was no more phenomena or phantom activity. However, I was a little bummed. I did have to say, for being my first ghost hunt, it had been fun. It had been a fun one, and it was definitely something I hope to do again someday. We regrouped at the front of the building, and some had caught a word or two of the other voice recorders. Some had heard scratching noises, others doors slammed just like us. We were the only group to see bare footprints or hear whispers, though. It appeared that some of the others did not believe us when we talked about the sounds of running and then found bare footprints in the dust. The whole ride home was quiet. I wanted to talk more about our experience, but I could tell Eric was worn out from the paranormal activity and wanted to let it go. So instead, I stared down out the window at the dark trees that blurred as we drove home. The next morning, I was preparing a bagel with some cream cheese while Eric was showering before class. Then a sudden, overwhelming smell of cigarette smoke seemed to encircle me in the kitchen. I hunted around towards the window and the walls and even the front door, trying to find the source of the smell. Every place I went, besides where I originally stood in the kitchen, seemed to be fainter in smell. How could the smell be originating from where I was standing in the kitchen if I wasn't smoking? Once Eric dressed, I asked him if he could smell cigarette smoke anywhere in the apartment. Amused, he asked, "Why were you smoking?" I gave him an annoyed glare of course not. I don't smell smoke. I'm going to be late though. He slipped a light jacket on and grabbed his car keys off the counter. I'll see you around 4:30. I gave him a kiss and a big hug and watched as he disappeared through the door. Alone again, I sniffed the air. No more smell of cigarettes. Weird. The whole next week was a blur of classes and tests. Eric and I weren't sleeping well, since some odd things would happen off and on in the apartment. First, our golden retriever Doug would wake us up in the middle of the night, barking in our room. We laid at the foot of our bed when he slept, but these nights he'd be barking around 2 in the morning at the corner in the room. Sometimes he'd even growl. Then the toilet started randomly flushing in the middle of the night. Not constantly, but every hour or two one of them would flush. Eric told me to have maintenance come to look at it. It wasn't until the next week that I realized that possibly something had followed us home from the ghost hunt. I was doing laundry while Eric was still in class. I heard our doorbell ring, so I threw all of the clean clothes quickly into the hamper bin. I'd been waiting for a package from my mom for my birthday. I was excited when it finally arrived. After I signed for it, I shut the door and walked back towards the laundry room while in the midst of trying to open it. When I walked into the laundry room, I froze and nearly dropped the package from the shock. The clean clothes I'd put into the clean hamper were literally thrown around the room. A t-shirt even hung from the ceiling fan as it slightly rotated. When Eric got home, I told him what happened. He just brushed it off, thinking I was exaggerating. I was absolutely not. How do clothes hop out of a bin on their own and end up thrown around the room when I'm the only one home? They don't. It wasn't long before Eric believed me. He had gotten up before me the next morning because he had a very early class that day. When he'd gone into the kitchen to start a pot of coffee, noticed every single cupboard in the drawers were open. Even the fridge, a container of milk was turned over, dripping all over the inside of the fridge and the floor beneath it. Frantically, he ran into the bedroom and shook me awake. He made me get up and look at the disaster in the kitchen. I will have to admit, it was pretty unnerving to wake up to that. I got out my laptop and searched some ways that we could cleanse the house by ourselves and hopefully get rid of whatever brought us home. I ran to a local church down the street and got a vial of holy water, then ran into the witchcraft store in town and bought some sage for smudging. When Eric got home from school, we lit the sage and repeated, "You are no longer welcome here. You need to leave in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. To leave now." I used the holy water to draw crosses on the outside of every door, in the kitchen and in the laundry room, because so far that's where most of the odd things happened. After we cleansed the house, we did not have anything else occur. Our toilets even stopped flushing themselves in the middle of the night. I'm pretty sure something followed us home from that ghost hunt, but now it's